My name's Frank, and for just shy of 30 years, my world has been a space about 8 feet wide and 7 feet tall. The cab of my Peterbilt 389. It's more of a home than any house I've ever owned. Everything has its place. Thermos of black coffee, always full, in the holder to my right. A well-worn atlas tucked into the side pocket of the door. And on the dash, held in place by a little non-slip mat, my journey logbook. Leather-bound, cracked at the spine, filled with nearly 3 decades of highways, way stations, and diesel prices. It's my Bible, and the first page, in my own neat, blocky handwriting, holds the first and only commandment: never pick up strangers. It's not because I'm a mean guy. It's just prudence. You hear stories. Every trucker does. Stories about the friendly face that turns out to be anything but. Stories that end at a rest stop with an empty wallet, or worse, an empty cab. My rule wasn't just a suggestion, it was a shield. It had kept me safe from whatever monsters lurked in the night, from coast to coast. My favorite stretch of road, believe it or not, is US 50 through Nevada. They call it the loneliest road in America. For most people, that sounds like a punishment. For me, it's peace. Out there, it's just you, the engines purr, the endless ribbon of asphalt, and a sky so full of stars it makes you feel small in a good way. It's a place where you can think. I knew every curve, every dip, every single roadside marker that looked like a rusted metal skeleton. It was predictable, safe, but on this particular night in October, safe was the last word I'd use to describe it. The storm hit without much warning, sweeping across the desert flats like a wet, angry ghost. One minute it was just a strong headwind, the next, the sky broke open. Rain wasn't falling, it was being thrown. It came down in sheets so thick my high beams just seemed to dissolve into a wall of white 100 feet ahead. My wipers were slapping back and forth on their highest setting, fighting a losing battle. The familiar hum of the engine was drowned out by the roar of the wind and the percussive drumming of water on the roof. It sounded like 1,000 angry fists trying to beat their way in. This wasn't my first storm, not by a long shot, but this one felt different, meaner. The loneliness of Highway 50 wasn't peaceful anymore. It was oppressive. The darkness outside the small bubble of my headlights felt absolute. That's when I saw him. A flicker of movement at the edge of my lights. A shape. At first, I thought it was a deer, maybe a coyote, but as I got closer, the shape resolved itself into a person. A kid, standing on the shoulder, thumb stuck out, head bowed against the deluge. My first instinct, the 30-year-old instinct, screamed at me. Keep going. It's the rule. It's the rule for a reason. This is exactly the kind of situation stories are born from. The dark and stormy night. The desperate stranger. My foot stayed steady on the accelerator, but my lights swept over him fully, and I got a better look. God, he was just a kid. Maybe 20, tops. Thin as a rail, wearing just a hoodie that was plastered to his skin, soaked through to a color so dark I couldn't tell what it was originally. He was shivering so violently I could see it from 50 yards away. His face was pale, his hair matted to his forehead. He didn't look dangerous. He looked pathetic, like a drowned puppy. The internal argument started. He's a kid, Frank. In a storm like this? What kind of threat could he possibly be? He'll catch his death out here. The other voice, the voice of my old man who first taught me the rule, fought back. It doesn't matter what he looks like. A trap is a trap. I was already past him. I looked in my side mirror, watching his small, dejected shape shrink in the red glow of my taillights. He lowered his arm. I pictured him out there for another hour. Another 2. What if no one else came along? This wasn't I-80. You could go an hour out here without seeing another soul, even on a clear day. On a night like this? He might as well have been on the moon. Damn it. The word came out as a low growl. Against every rational thought, against the one rule I had lived by my entire career, I started to slow the big rig down. The air brakes hissed in protest, a sound like a giant sigh of disappointment. It took a while to bring 18 wheels to a stop safely on the wet shoulder. I left the engine running, the lights on. I flicked on the passenger side floods, illuminating the spot where he stood. He looked up, his face a mixture of shock and desperate hope. I leaned over and pushed open the passenger door. The wind and rain immediately blasted into the cab, cold and loud. Get in, I shouted over the noise. Before you drown out there. He scrambled, half running, half stumbling, and pulled himself up the steps and into the cab, slamming the door behind him. The sudden quiet was a relief. The cab was once again my sanctuary, only now it had a stranger in it. He sat there for a moment, dripping and panting, creating a small puddle on my rubber floor mat. He was just a boy. Up close, he looked even younger. Water ran in rivulets from his hair down his pale face. "Thank you," he gasped, his teeth chattering. "Oh my God, thank you, sir. I thought I was done for." "Don't mention it," I said, trying to sound gruff, trying to hide the fact that I was already second-guessing myself. "Where you headed?" "Just to the next stop," he said, pushing wet hair out of his eyes. "Cold Springs, the truck stop there? I can get a coffee, warm up, and figure it out from there. My car broke down a few miles back." Total junker. It was a plausible story. I nodded, putting the truck in gear and carefully pulling back onto the empty highway. "Cold Springs it is. About 40 miles. My name's Leo," he offered, extending a cold, damp hand. I hesitated for a second before shaking it briefly. His grip was weak. "Frank," I said. He settled into the seat, and that's when I noticed a couple of things. The first was the backpack. It was an old canvas thing, dark green, with frayed straps and a few patches sewn on. It wasn't on the floor or in his lap in a relaxed way. He was hugging it to his chest, tightly, like it contained something precious, or maybe something he didn't want anyone else to touch. "You can toss that in the sleeper cab if you want, give you some more room," I offered, nodding towards the curtained-off bunk behind my seat. "Oh, no, thank you, sir. It's fine right here," he said quickly. A little too quickly. He hugged it even tighter. "Okay, weird," I thought. But whatever. Kids and their stuff. Probably has a laptop in it, doesn't want it getting banged around. I let it go. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds being the rhythmic slap of the wipers and the steady drone of the diesel engine. I tried to relax, to tell myself I'd done a good thing. A human thing. The kid was just trying to get out of a bad spot. But then I saw the second thing. His eyes. He wasn't looking out the window, or at the dashboard in general. He kept flicking his gaze over to my logbook. It wasn't a long, curious stare. It was a series of quick, almost subconscious glances. A dart of the eyes over to the book, then back to the windshield. Then a few seconds later, another one. Glance. Look away. Glance. Look away. My own eyes narrowed. What was so interesting about an old logbook? It's just dates, miles, locations. The most boring reading imaginable unless you're the one who wrote it, or you're the dot looking to give out a fine. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. It was a feeling I hadn't had in a long, long time. I pushed it down. I was tired. It was a stressful night. I was just being paranoid because I'd broken my own rule. "Everything all right?" I asked, my voice casual. He jumped slightly, as if startled out of a trance. "Oh, yeah, sorry, just zoning out. It's warm in here, feels good." He gave me a small, slightly forced smile. I just grunted in response and focused on the road. The knot in my stomach didn't go away. That's when the CB radio crackled to life, breaking the tension. "Breaker 19, anyone got a copy on this westbound 50? The voice was a familiar kind of gravelly, a fellow lifer by the sound of him. I picked up my mic. "You got a copy here, go ahead," I said. "Yeah, 10-4, driver. Just a heads up for yaw, about 5 miles east of Cold Springs. There's a nasty patch of black ice forming on that downhill curve. Saw a four-wheeler do a 180. He's okay, but just take it slow through there. It'll sneak up on you." 10-4 on that, good buddy, I responded, the familiar jargon a small comfort. "Appreciate the warning. I'll keep an eye out. You have a safe one. You too, driver. Keep the shiny side up." The radio went silent. I hung the mic back on its hook. The cab was quiet again, save for the storm. I glanced over at Leo. He was sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead into the rain-streaked darkness, his face completely blank. The kid hadn't moved a muscle. And then, in the quiet of the cab, I heard it. A low whisper, so quiet I almost thought it was just the wind. He licked his lips, and in a perfect, chilling imitation of the voice that had just come over the radio, the same gravelly tone, the same weary drawl, the same cadence, he mumbled to himself, "Take it slow through there. It'll sneak up on you." My blood ran cold, every hair on my arms stood on end. I snapped my head to look at him, but he was still just staring forward, his expression unchanged, as if he hadn't said a thing. As if he hadn't just mimicked a stranger's voice with impossible accuracy. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. An echo? Did the radio do something weird? Am I so tired that I'm actually hallucinating? It had to be that. I was just exhausted. That was the only thing that made sense. But as I turned my eyes back to the treacherous, rain-slicked road ahead, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the storm outside. I was terrified of the silence inside my cab. The silence in the cab was different now. Before, it had been a comfortable, familiar companion, the low rumble of the diesel a steady heartbeat. Now, it was heavy, suffocating. It was an active silence, the kind that presses in on you, making your ears strain for sounds that aren't there. Every pop and creak of the truck settling, every swoosh of water under the tires, sounded unnaturally loud. I'm not a guy who spooks easy. You can't be, not in this line of work. 30 years of nights just like this one teaches you to separate the real threats from the phantoms your tired mind cooks up. And my mind was definitely tired. That had to be it. I'd been pushing hard for 10, maybe 11 hours. The storm, the concentration it took just to keep this rig on the road, it was a perfect recipe for exhaustion to play tricks on you. Hearing things. Yeah, that had to be it. The kid mumbled something, and in my worn-out state, my brain just filled in the blanks with the last thing I'd heard on the radio. It was a logical, simple explanation, but my knuckles were still white on the wheel. Logic wasn't doing a damn thing to loosen the knot in my gut. I chanced a glance over at him. Leo. He was just sitting there, a perfect statue of stillness, staring out the passenger window into the black, rain-lashed void. The weak light from the dashboard instruments cast his face in pale greens and oranges, carving sharp shadows under his cheekbones. He looked like a sketch, something not quite real. He wasn't shivering anymore. He wasn't looking at my logbook. He was just there, an inert, quiet presence that had somehow changed the entire chemical composition of my sanctuary. So, I started, my own voice sounding forced, a rock skipping across a silent lake. I had to break this quiet. I had to make things normal again. Car broke down, you said? What kind of car you got? He didn't turn his head. For a second, I thought he hadn't heard me over the engine. Then, he spoke, his voice a low monotone. Just an old sedan. Nothing special. Yeah? Well, this weather will kill an old battery quick. Anything can happen out here. I was just talking to talk, filling the space. You from around here? A slight pause. Not really. Just passing through. Where you headed, then? After Cold Springs, I mean. Another pause, this one longer. He finally turned his head slightly, his eyes still fixed on the darkness outside. Not sure yet. Depends on what I can figure out. The answers were short, polished, smooth. There was nothing to grab onto. No details, no personality. It was like talking to a pre-recorded message. Every question I asked was a door, and he just politely closed each one in my face. The conversation died as quickly as I had started it. The heavy silence rolled back in, even more oppressive this time because I had failed to push it away. Fine, I told myself. Let the kid have his silence. He's probably embarrassed about his car, freaked out by the storm. He just wants to get to the truck stop. 40 miles. I can do 40 miles of anything. I cranked the radio, not the CB but the regular FM, and found the station playing old country music through a curtain of static. It was better than nothing. About 15 minutes later, the low fuel light blinked on. It was expected. I'd planned to fill up at Cold Springs anyway. The station there, a 24-hour place called the Desert Star, was an ugly but reliable old depot. It wasn't much, just a set of pumps, a small convenience store with burnt coffee, and a gravel lot big enough for a few rigs. But tonight, its distant, sickly yellow glow on the horizon looked like the gates of heaven. As I took the off-ramp, slowing the rig down, a new kind of anxiety set in. I had to get out to pump the fuel. I had to go inside to pay and grab that coffee I was desperately craving. Which meant leaving him, leaving this strange, silent kid alone in my cab, alone with my wallet in the glove box, my CB, my logbook. My home, the rule I'd already broken, never pick up strangers. Had a silent partner. Never leave a stranger alone in your truck. I pulled up to the diesel pumps under the big, corrugated awning that was shaking in the wind. The rain hammered down on it, a deafening drum solo. I killed the engine, and the sudden absence of its roar made the storm sound 10 times louder. I turned to him. All right, I gotta fuel up and run inside for a minute. You can wait here. He just nodded, his eyes finally looking at me. They were blank, unreadable. Okay, I'll be quick. 5 minutes, tops. I was trying to convince myself, not him. What could he do in 5 minutes? Steal my logbook? Take my half-empty thermos? It seemed stupid. I was a big guy, he was a skinny kid. I was letting my imagination get the better of me. I grabbed my wallet and my keys, and hesitated. For a split second, I thought about telling him to come inside with me. But that felt weird, too. Like I was accusing him of something. Like I was his babysitter. Damn it, Frank, I thought. Just get the coffee. I pushed open the door and jumped down into the wind and rain, pulling my jacket tight. The cold was a shock. I fumbled with the gas cap, started the pump, and then made a run for the convenience store door, the little bell above it ringing weakly as I burst in. The place was empty except for a tired-looking clerk behind the counter, a woman with graying hair who was watching a tiny black and white TV. The air smelled of stale hot dogs and pine sol. It was all so blessedly, horribly normal. I felt my shoulders relax an inch. I was being an idiot. The kid was just a kid. I was a paranoid old trucker. I poured myself the largest coffee they had, the liquid looking thick and black as crude oil. I took it to the counter. Nasty one tonight, the clerk said without looking away from her TV. Tell me about it, I grunted, handing her a 20. She made change slowly. My eyes kept flicking back to the window, to my truck sitting under the buzzing yellow lights. I could just see the silhouette of the kid in the passenger seat. He wasn't moving, just sitting there, still as a stone. See? I told myself. Nothing to worry about. She handed me my change. You be safe out there. You too, I said, and hurried back out into the storm. I climbed back up the steps and into the cab, slamming the door and shutting out the world. The warmth felt good. I put the coffee in its holder and took a deep, calming breath. Leo hadn't moved. He was in the exact same position, staring out the window. Nothing was disturbed. My wallet was still in my pocket. Everything was fine, and then I saw it. It wasn't a big thing. In fact, it was so small that 99% of people would never have noticed. But I'm not 99% of people. My cab has an order to it, a geography, and my logbook, my leather-bound Bible, always sat on its non-slip mat with its spine perfectly parallel to the edge of the dashboard. It was crooked. It had been moved, just an inch, maybe less, rotated ever so slightly counterclockwise. My blood, which had just started to warm up, went instantly to ice. The coffee I'd craved a minute ago was forgotten. My hand trembled as I reached out and picked the book up. The leather felt cold, alien. He hadn't just touched it. He'd picked it up, opened it, looked through it, while I was 30 feet away buying coffee. My heart was a fist, pounding against my ribs. I tried to keep my breathing even. I didn't want him to know that I knew. I opened the book, my thumb fumbling with the page marker, a worn piece of string. I flipped to today's entry. There was my handwriting, my familiar, blocky, all-caps scrawl. October 12th, WBUS 50. Load, machine parts, Dest, Reno, Nevada, 2030. Heavy rain, strong headwinds. Visibility poor. That was it. That's where I had left off. But it wasn't the last line on the page anymore. Beneath my entry, there was another line. A new line. It was written in the same black pen I always used, the one clipped to the inside cover. And it was in my handwriting. It wasn't a forgery. It wasn't a good imitation. It was perfect. The exact way I looped my G. The way I never fully closed the top of my A. The sharp, definitive cross on my T. It was my penmanship, as familiar to me as my own face in the mirror. My eyes read the words, but my brain refused to process them. They sat there on the page, an impossible black stain on reality. 2240, picked up a passenger. Biggest mistake. My hand was shaking, not a little tremble, but a full-on, palsy-like quake. The leather-bound logbook felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The words on the page didn't shimmer or blur. They were stark, solid, and utterly impossible. My own handwriting, my pen, staring back at me from the page and calling me a liar. Biggest mistake. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't seem to get enough air into my lungs. The smell of stale hot dogs and pine sol from the convenience store was gone, replaced by the scent of cold ozone, the smell of fear. A part of my brain, the logical part that had gotten me through 30 years on the road, was desperately trying to find an explanation. You were tired, Frank. You were on autopilot. You must have written it yourself when you pulled over and just plain forgot. It was a flimsy shield, and I knew it. I've forgotten a lot of things in my life, anniversaries, where I put my keys, the name of a town I just left, but I've never forgotten my own actions from 10 seconds prior. I had not written those words. I snapped the book shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the sudden, dead quiet of the cab. I didn't dare look over at him. I could feel his presence like a patch of ice on a hot stove. It wasn't natural. I had to get out of there. Not out of the truck, but out of that place. The Desert Star, which had looked like a beacon of safety minutes ago, now felt like a trap. The sickly yellow lights seemed to press in on the cab, holding me in place. Moving was survival. Staying still was death. That was the law of the road, and it was the only law that made sense right now. My movements were stiff, robotic, like I was watching someone else control my body. I slotted the key into the ignition. I didn't look at him. I just kept my eyes fixed forward, on the rain-streaked windshield and the dark ribbon of US 50 waiting for me. I turned the key. The massive diesel engine coughed once, then roared to life. Its familiar, guttural rumble was usually a comfort, the sound of my own power. Tonight, it just felt like a cage rattling its bars. I put the rig in gear. The air brakes hissed, a long, mournful sigh. I eased off the clutch, and the Peterbilt began to roll forward, pulling away from the island of light and back into the consuming darkness. The convenience store, the tired clerk, the whole scene of blessed normalcy shrank in my rearview mirror until it was just another smear of light in the storm. We were alone again, just me, the kid, and the impossible words in my logbook. The silence came back, but it was worse now. It was a thinking silence. A waiting silence. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't moved. He hadn't reacted to me slamming the book shut or the engine roaring to life. He just sat there. I could feel his eyes on the side of my head. I didn't have to see them to know they were there. It was a physical pressure. The wipers swished back and forth, a hypnotic, maddening rhythm. Swoosh thump, each pass revealed the empty, black road, and each pass wiped it away again. It was just me and him, suspended in a bubble of metal and glass, hurtling through nothing. The knot in my gut, the one that had been there since he mimicked the CB radio, had tightened into a cold, solid ball of dread. There are rules to being scared. You know, when something jumps out at you, you yell. When a tire blows, your heart leaps into your throat and you fight the wheel. It's a spike of fear, hot and fast, and then it's over and you deal with the aftermath. This wasn't that. This was a slow-acting poison. It wasn't in my heart, it was in my blood, a creeping cold that was shutting everything down. I had to do something. I had to say something. Normalcy. That's what I needed. I had to pretend the logbook didn't exist. Pretend he was just a wet kid going to the next town. If I could just make it feel normal, maybe it would become normal. My throat was dry. I swallowed hard, my mouth tasting like copper. So, almost there, I said. My voice was a croak. It sounded weak, pathetic. It wasn't the voice of Frank the trucker, king of his cab. It was the voice of a scared old man. He didn't answer for a long moment. The only sound was the engine and the rain and the swoosh thump of the wipers. I was about to repeat myself, to force the issue, when he finally spoke. His voice was calm, level, devoid of any emotion at all. Yeah, almost there. That was it. The conversation was dead on arrival. The silence flooded back in, heavier than before. It felt like he was enjoying this, playing with me. He knew I was scared. He knew what he'd written in that book, and he knew that I had seen it. And now he was just waiting for me to break. My mind raced, scrambling for an anchor, something real in this nightmare. I thought about home, about my house in Carson City, the worn armchair I liked, the smell of coffee brewing in the morning. I thought about my wife. And without meaning to, I mumbled it out loud, a prayer whispered into the oppressive dark. Gotta call Martha. She'll be worried. It wasn't for him, it was for me. Just saying her name was like lighting a candle in a dark room. Martha, my rock. 42 years we'd been married. She was substance. She was reality. She was everything this kid wasn't. And then he turned his head. I felt the motion more than saw it. A slow, deliberate swivel. I risked a glance. In the dim, green and orange glow of the dashboard, his face was a mask. But there was something new on it. The faintest ghost of a smile. It didn't touch his eyes. His eyes were like chips of dark glass. He spoke, and the words he chose were not a guess. They were a key turning in a lock I didn't know he could open. He said them clearly, cleanly, cutting through the noise of the storm like a surgeon's scalpel. Your wife, Martha, she must be very worried when you haven't called, huh? Time stopped. The truck was still moving, the engine still thrumming, the rain still hammering on the roof, but inside my head, everything came to a dead halt. The word, the name, Martha, he didn't just say a name. He said it like he knew her, like he'd just been talking to her on the phone. Your wife, Martha. My blood didn't just run cold. It evaporated, it turned to dust in my veins. There's a special kind of terror that comes not from seeing a monster, but from realizing the monster knows your name. This was 1,000 times worse. This thing knew my wife's name. How? The question screamed in my skull, a silent, echoing shriek. How could he possibly know her name? My phone was in my pocket, turned off. I hadn't used it all night. The only picture I had of her was a faded old snapshot tucked deep in my wallet, which had been in my pocket when I went inside the store. I never talked about my personal life on the CB. Never. It was a rule. You don't give people ammunition. You don't give them a way in. In 30 years of driving, I had never, not once, mentioned the name, Martha, to another soul on this highway. There was no way for him to know. It was as impossible as him forging my handwriting. And yet, he did. My hands were fused to the steering wheel. I could feel the plastic grooves biting into my palms, but I couldn't have let go if I tried. I was staring straight ahead, at the hypnotic lines of the highway disappearing under my rig, but I wasn't seeing them. I was seeing my wife's face. I was seeing her watering the roses in our front yard. I was seeing the morning she packed my lunch for this very trip, telling me to be safe. He knew her name, the thin veneer of rationality I'd been clinging to, that he was just a weird kid, that I was just tired and paranoid, shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't a weird kid. This wasn't a prank. My sanctuary hadn't just been invaded, it had been compromised on a fundamental level. He hadn't just stepped into my truck, he had stepped into my life, from a direction I couldn't see or understand. He was still looking at me. I could feel the weight of his gaze. The faint, cold smile was probably still there. I didn't turn to check. I was afraid of what I'd see. I was afraid that if I looked at him now, he wouldn't look like a skinny 20-year-old kid anymore. The road ahead was a tunnel of darkness, and the rain was coming down harder than ever. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the one raging inside me. I was trapped, locked in a 2-ton steel box moving at 60 miles an hour, sharing the space with something that could read my logbook, copy my handwriting, and pull the name of my wife out of thin air. It wasn't human, or if it was a kind of human I had never conceived of. Cold, all-knowing, predatory, the loneliness of the road, the thing I had always cherished, had turned on me. There was no one to call for help. No one to flag down. It was just me and him, the hunter and the prey, sharing the same small space, with miles of empty, screaming darkness on all sides. And I finally understood. I wasn't giving him a ride. He was taking me for one. The name hung in the air inside the cab. Martha. It wasn't just a word anymore. It was a violation. It was a key he'd somehow found to a room deep inside me that I kept locked from the world, from the road. The roaring of the engine, the hammering of the rain, the steady thump of the wipers, all of it faded away into a dull, distant hum. The only thing I could hear was that name, spoken in his dead calm voice, echoing in the cavern of my skull. How? The question wasn't a thought, it was a physical spasm, a jolt that ran up my spine. My mind, the logical part of it that knew about engine tolerances and load balances, scrambled for an answer and came up empty. He couldn't know. It was impossible. There are rules to the universe, you know? Cause and effect. You don't get to know a man's wife's name just by sitting next to him in a storm. But he did, and the fact that he did broke all the rules. For a long second, maybe 10, maybe a full minute, I was just a statue made of meat. My hands were clamped onto the steering wheel so tight I could feel the textured plastic digging grooves into my palms. My foot was still on the accelerator, keeping us at a steady 60 miles per hour, hurtling through the black, wet nothing of the Nevada desert. It was like my body was still driving the truck, but my soul had bailed out somewhere back down the highway. I was gone. Then something else kicked in. Not logic, not reason, something older, something buried deep in the animal part of your brain that only wakes up when the predator is in the room with you. It's a cold, clean feeling. It cuts through the panic like a blade. All the questions, the how, the why, they all just vanished. They didn't matter. Only one thought was left, shining and clear and sharp. Get out. It wasn't a plan. It was an instinct. Get out. I had to get out of this cab. This cab, my home, my castle, my sanctuary for 30 years, had become a coffin. A 2-ton, 18-wheel coffin, and I was locked inside with my own personal ghost. My eyes, which had been staring unseeing into the hypnotic swirl of rain and headlights, started to work again. I was scanning, looking for anything, an off-ramp, a rest area, another truck, something, anything. The loneliness of US 50, the very thing I usually loved, had become my enemy. It was a vast, empty stage for whatever was about to happen. And then I saw it. It was faint at first, a blurry star low on the horizon, distorted by the sheets of rain on the windshield. But it grew brighter, sharper, a smear of orange and white light against the oppressive black. A gas station, a 24-hour beacon of civilization out here in the middle of nowhere. It had a name I couldn't make out yet, but it had lights and a big sign, and probably a sleepy attendant behind a plexiglass window. It had people. It was a port in the storm. It was hope. The animal instinct now had a direction. My brain started to work again, but it was a different kind of thinking. It was pure calculation, survival math. I couldn't just slam on the brakes and jump out screaming. He was sitting right there. God only knew what he would do. I had a good 100 pounds on him, but there was a coldness in that kid that made weight and muscle feel completely irrelevant. No, I had to be smart. I had to make it look normal. I took a breath. It was shaky, but it was a breath. I let it out slow. I flexed my fingers on the wheel, one at a time, trying to get the feeling back into them. Damn it, I said. I tried to put a little grit in my voice, a little tired frustration. The voice of a trucker with a mechanical problem. You hear that? He didn't answer. I didn't dare look at him. I just kept my eyes on the approaching island of light. Engines making a noise, I said, improvising. A clicking. Been doing it on and off for the past hour. It was a stupid lie, but in the rumble of the diesel and the storm, maybe it was a believable one. I'm gonna pull into this station up here. Gotta check the oil. Can't risk breaking down out here. Still nothing from him. The silence was absolute. It was worse than an argument. It felt like he knew. Like he was sitting there, listening to my pathetic little plan, and was amused by it. The feeling was so strong it was like a smell in the air, the cold, metallic scent of contempt. But what choice did I have? I flicked on the turn signal. The steady tick-tock of the signal was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a clock counting down. I eased my foot off the accelerator, and the rig began to slow, the pitch of the engine dropping. The hiss of the air brakes was a long, slow sigh of relief. Each mile per hour we shed felt like a pound of weight being lifted off my chest. 70, 60, 50. The turn-off was about 200 yards away. A simple right turn into a big, wide-open parking lot. I could see the place clearly now. Desert Fuel, the sign said in big red letters. The pumps were under a brightly lit canopy. I could see a couple of cars parked near the storefront. It was real. It was safe. My heart, I swear, it was trying to punch its way out of my ribs. Thump thump thump, beating a frantic rhythm against my bones. Just a little farther. Play it cool. Act normal. Get the truck stopped. Get out of the cab, and then run. Run and don't look back. That was the whole game. As the truck slowed to maybe 30, ready to make the turn, he finally moved. It wasn't a quick motion. It was a slow, deliberate swivel of his head. I felt his eyes on the side of my face, and even though I was staring straight ahead, I could feel the absolute lack of emotion in them. The faint, ghostly smile he'd had before was gone. His face, in the flickering green and orange glow of my dashboard, was a perfect, smooth mask of indifference. And then he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, it wasn't threatening, it was worse. It was completely calm, a simple, conversational tone that cut right through my paper-thin hope and shredded it to pieces. You think they'll help you? He asked. The words just hung there. My hand froze on the wheel. My foot hovered over the brake. My plan, which had seemed so solid a second ago, dissolved into smoke. What are you talking about? I managed to say, my voice a dry rasp. He turned his body slightly in the seat to face me more directly. The indifference on his face was now shifting, molding into something else. It was a look of pity, almost. The kind of look you'd give a dumb animal right before you put it out of its misery. Let's just think about it, Frank, he said, using my name with a casual familiarity that made my skin crawl. Picture the scene. You pull up in this giant, noisy rig. You, a big guy, a trucker, middle of the night, covered in road grime. You jump out, screaming and pointing at me. He gestured vaguely at himself, at his thin frame, his boyish face, the wet clothes that made him look small and pathetic. I'm just a kid, a college student, maybe. Soaking wet, got a lift from a nice man because my car broke down in the storm. He let the image hang in the air between us. He was right, and the worst part was, I knew he was right. I saw it instantly, the sleepy clerk peering out the window. The other customers, they wouldn't see a man in terror. They'd see a big, crazy trucker losing his mind and menacing some poor kid. Who looked more frightening? It wasn't even a question. He had me completely checkmated. The sanctuary of the gas station had just become another part of the trap. There was no help, there was nowhere to run. The cold, primal instinct to survive was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of pure, hopeless despair. I was a fly in his web, and I had only just now realized that the whole world was the web. He saw the understanding dawn on my face. He saw the last bit of fight drain out of me, and his expression changed again. That dead, flat look returned to his eyes, but this time, there was a spark behind it. A glint of something that looked horribly like satisfaction. He reached down, slowly, deliberately, to the old, worn backpack that had been sitting in his lap the entire time, the one he cradled like it was a baby. His eyes never left mine. They were locked onto me, pinning me to my seat. His fingers found the zipper. You really want to know, don't you? He said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, barely audible over the idling engine in the rain. You want to know how I know about Martha? How I knew what you wrote in your little book? The metallic rasp of the zipper starting to open was the only sound. It was slow, measured, each tooth of the zipper parting felt like a second of my life ticking away. You really want to see why I know so much about drivers like you? The sound of that zipper was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It wasn't a quick rip, not like someone in a hurry to get something. No, it was a slow, deliberate crawl. A metallic rasp, like a file being drawn across a bone, tooth by agonizing tooth. It cut through the idling rumble of my Peterbilt, through the drumming of the rain, through the frantic beat of my own heart. It was the only sound in the universe. My whole life, my 30 years on the road, my home, my wife waiting for a call I might never make, all of it had been reduced to the slow, steady progress of a brass zipper on a worn-out backpack. His eyes never left mine. They were black pits in the dim green light of the dashboard. All the false vulnerability, the shivering kid act, it was gone. It had peeled away like a sunburn, revealing something ancient and cold underneath. He was watching me watch him, and he was savoring the moment. He was savoring the precise second that my flimsy, desperate little plan to run for the gas station had crumbled into dust. You really want to know, don't you? He'd asked. His voice a calm poison. I couldn't answer. My tongue was a lead weight in my mouth. All I could do was stare at his hands, at the slow, methodical way his fingers moved, and listen to that god-awful zzzzzzzzzzzip. He wasn't just unzipping a bag. He was opening a tomb. The flap fell open. For a second, what I saw didn't make any sense. It was just a jumble of shapes and colors. My brain, the part of it that was still trying to function like a human's, couldn't process it. It was like looking at one of those abstract paintings. You see the parts, but the whole picture won't come together. There was plastic, a glint of laminated plastic, a lot of it, and paper, the dark blue and black covers of little notebooks, metal, a cheap-looking silver ring, the dull brass of a Zippo lighter. He didn't say a word. He just tilted the backpack forward slightly, an invitation, a presentation, and then the pieces clicked into place. My blood went cold, not just cold, it felt like it turned to ice water and slush in my veins. The plastic rectangles, they weren't abstract shapes, they were driver's licenses, not one or two, a thick stack of them, held together with a grubby rubber band. I could see the top one clearly in the glow of the dash. A man with a thick neck and a tired expression, maybe 10 years older than me. From Arizona, underneath his, I could see the edge of another, this one from Texas. And another from Oregon, a whole stack of lives, boiled down to a name, a date of birth, and a bad photo. These were men like me, men who drove these same lonely roads. The notebooks, they were a gut punch. There must have been half a dozen of them, tucked in alongside the licenses. They were the exact same kind I use, the simple, spiral-bound logbooks you can buy at any truck stop from coast to coast. My logbook, the one sitting right there on my own dashboard, the one he had written in. He'd had practice. Oh my God, he'd had a lot of practice. This wasn't a robbery. Robbers want your wallet, maybe your rig. This was something else. This was collecting. My eyes kept scanning the contents of that horrible bag, drawn by a morbid gravity I couldn't fight. I saw a small, framed photo, the glass cracked. It was a picture of a little girl with pigtails and a missing front tooth, sitting on a man's lap. The man's face was cut off by the edge of the frame. There was a single, tarnished wedding band, a key on a chain with a plastic fob from a motel in Utah. Each item was a story, a life, a wife like my Martha, waiting for a call, a kid waiting for their dad to come home. He saw me looking, he saw the understanding flicker and then blaze into terror in my eyes. The barest hint of a smile touched his lips, a chilling, academic kind of approval. You see, Frank, he said, his voice still that same, terrible, even whisper. It's a pattern. You're all so predictable. All of you. He made a small gesture with his hand that took in my cab, my logbook, the road stretching into the rainy night. You have your rules, your routines, your little sanctuaries. He paused, and you all have someone waiting at home. The name, Martha, hung in the air again, but this time it wasn't a question. It was a final nail. It was the last piece of the puzzle he was laying out for me. He hadn't just guessed. He hadn't overheard a phone call. He knew because he'd done this before. He'd sat in other cabs with other men just like me, and he had learned their stories before he collected them. How had he known what I wrote in my log? Because he'd read a dozen others just like it. How had he known what the other trucker said on the CB? Maybe from a scanner, maybe just from a sick kind of intuition built from experience. And Martha, dear God, Martha. Had he found a picture in my wallet while I was in the rest stop? Had he glanced at a letter on the passenger seat? It didn't matter how, the only thing that mattered was that he knew. And in his world, knowing was the end of the game. I was next. The realization wasn't a thought, it was a physical certainty, like knowing the ground is there when you fall. My name would be on a license in that bag. My logbook would join the stack. My wedding ring, the one Martha slipped on my finger 35 years ago, would clink against that other one in the bottom of a greasy backpack. My life would become another one of his trophies. And that's when something in my head just broke. The fear, the despair, the cold, paralyzing dread. It was all still there, but something else erupted through it. It was that animal thing I'd felt before, but now it wasn't a quiet instinct. It was a nuclear explosion. It was raw survival, stripped of all reason, all plans, all logic. There was no more thinking. There was no more trying to outsmart him. There was only one word, one command, screaming in every cell of my body. Now, I didn't yell, I didn't say a word. My body just moved. My right foot, which had been hovering over the brake, slammed down. Not an ease, not a slow deceleration. I stomped on that brake pedal with every ounce of my 250 pounds. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The air brakes shrieked, a sound of pure mechanical agony. The massive weight of the rig, even at only 30 miles an hour, was immense. The whole world lurched. The tires lost their grip on the slick, rain-drenched asphalt. The back end of the trailer started to fishtail, a slow, terrifying slide that sent a shudder through the entire chassis. The kingpin groaned. Inside the cab, it was chaos. Leo, for all his cold composure, was just a man made of flesh and bone. He hadn't been expecting it. He was thrown forward with a grunt, his head cracking against the dashboard. The backpack tumbled from his lap, and its grotesque contents spilled across the floor mat. Licenses, logbooks, a child's photograph. They scattered like dead leaves in the dim green light. I didn't wait. I didn't check to see if he was hurt. In that moment, he wasn't a person to me anymore. He was a snake in my house, and I had to get out. My left hand, which was already on the door, yanked the latch. It was heavy, but the adrenaline surging through me made it feel like paper. I threw my entire body weight against it. My shoulder hit the cold steel with a thud that I'd feel for weeks. The door flew open with a shriek of tortured metal, wrenched backward by the wind and the skidding motion of the truck. Rain and wind exploded into the cab, a screaming, wet assault. For one split second, I was suspended between two worlds. Behind me, in the driver's seat, was the wreck of my home. The familiar smell of coffee now tainted with something evil, the scattered pieces of other men's lives on the floor. In front of me was the raging blackness of a Nevada night, a whirlwind of rain and noise and nothing. I chose the nothing. I didn't climb out. I fell. I threw myself out of the open door, out of my moving truck, and into the storm. I hit the wet asphalt hard, my shoulder and hip taking the brunt of the impact. The world was a spinning, painful blur of road, rain, and the grinding sound of my own rig still jackknifing to a halt somewhere behind me. I scrambled to my feet, my ankle screaming in protest. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was terrified that if I looked back, I'd see him coming out after me, that calm, dead smile on his face. I just ran. I ran toward the only light in the world, the blurry, beautiful orange and white sign of the Desert Fuel gas station. It seemed a million miles away. My breath came in ragged, sobbing gasps. My lungs burned. The rain was so heavy it felt like I was running underwater, each step a monumental effort. The only sounds were my own boots slapping on the pavement, the roar of the storm in my ears, and the pounding of my blood. Behind me, the sound of my life's work, my Peterbilt, finally ground to a stop. Its engine was still running, a deep, rhythmic hum that I knew as well as my own heartbeat. Its headlights cut two perfect, lonely cones into the black, rain-swept darkness. And the door to my cab, my sanctuary, a place no stranger had ever been allowed to enter, was wide open. An empty, gaping mouth, waiting patiently in the middle of the loneliest road in America. I don't know how long I ran. It couldn't have been more than 100 yards, but it felt like a marathon in hell. Every step was a new kind of pain. My shoulder screamed from where I'd hit the door. My hip felt like it had been punched by a sledgehammer. And my ankle, the one I'd rolled on the pavement, sent jolts of fire up my leg with every clumsy, stumbling stride. The rain was a solid wall of water, plastering my hair to my skull and trying to drown me where I stood. But I didn't care. Pain was good. Pain meant I was still alive. I practically fell through the glass door of the Desert Fuel station. The little bell above it gave a cheerful, totally inappropriate jingle. I must have been a hell of a sight. A man my size, soaked to the bone, covered in road grime, wild-eyed and gasping for air like a landed fish. Behind the counter was a kid, maybe 19, 20 years old. Skinny, with a bad haircut and a name tag that read, Ricky. His eyes went wide, and the half-eaten bag of chips in his hand fell to the counter. He took a half-step back, his hand inching toward the phone. Call the cops, I gasped, leaning against a display of beef jerky, my legs finally giving out. My chest felt like it was going to explode. My truck, on the highway, there's a guy. I couldn't finish the sentence. The words were a jumble in my head. Ricky, to his credit, didn't hesitate for more than a second. He saw the genuine, animal terror in my eyes. He fumbled with the old landline phone, his fingers shaking as he jabbed at the numbers 911. Yeah, hello? I got a guy here at the Desert Fuel on 50, he stammered into the receiver. He just ran in, says something about his truck, a guy in his truck. I don't know, man, he looks bad. Real bad. Please, just send someone. I just slid down to the grimy linoleum floor, my back against the snack rack. The adrenaline was gone, and a deep, bone-rattling chill was setting in. I could hear Ricky's hushed, frantic voice on the phone, the crinkle of the chip bag he dropped, the hum of the beverage cooler. Normal sounds, safe sounds, but all I could really hear was the slow, metallic rasp of that backpack zipper. All I could see were those laminated faces staring up from the floor of my cab. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 10 minutes before the flashing lights cut through the storm. Red and blue strobing across the wet asphalt, reflecting off the gas pumps. A highway patrol car pulled up, followed by another. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a wave of pure, uncut relief washed over me. It was over. They were here. I was safe. A state trooper, a woman with a stern face and hair pulled back in a tight bun, came in first. Ricky pointed a shaky finger at me. She approached cautiously, her hand resting near her sidearm. Sir, I'm Officer Miller. Can you tell me what happened? I tried. God knows I tried. Between chattering teeth and ragged breaths, I told her everything. The storm, the kid on the side of the road, breaking my own rule. The weirdness, the way he mimicked the CB radio. The logbook, Martha's name, the goddamn backpack. I told her how I'd slammed on the brakes and thrown myself out of my own moving truck. She listened, her expression unreadable. She and her partner, a younger guy named Evans, sat me down in a booth in the corner, and Ricky brought me a cup of coffee that was mostly just hot brown water. I didn't care. I wrapped my freezing hands around it. They went out to the rig. I watched them through the rain-streaked window. My Peterbilt was sitting there just like I'd left it, angled awkwardly across the shoulder. The engine was still humming that familiar tune. The headlights were still on, cutting through the downpour, and the driver's side door was still hanging wide open, an invitation to the storm. They were out there for a long time. They used their big mag lights, sweeping the beams inside the cab, around the truck, up and down the stretch of empty road. When they came back in, their faces were grim. "Okay, Mr. Franklin," Officer Miller said, sitting down across from me. Her voice was level, professional. "Too professional. We've searched your truck in the immediate area." She paused. I waited. "There's no one there," she said flatly. "The cab is empty. No backpack. No scattered driver's licenses. Nothing." I just stared at her. "No, that's not possible." He was right there. The stuff spilled all over the floor mat. The mat's wet from the rain coming in the door, but that's it, her partner, Evans, chimed in. He had that look on his face. The one cops get when they think they're dealing with a drunk or a lunatic. "We can't find any sign that anyone besides you was in that vehicle, sir." "But the logbook," I said, my voice rising. "My logbook, on the dashboard. He wrote in it, 'Biggest mistake.' Look at it." Miller nodded slowly. "We have your logbook. There's an entry at 2240, just like you said." She slid it across the table. I flipped it open. There it was, my own handwriting describing the storm, and right below it, in what looked for all the world like my own handwriting, 2240. "Picked up a passenger. Biggest mistake. See?" I pleaded. "That's it. That's what he wrote." "Sir," she said, her voice softening just a little, but the skepticism was still there, thick as mud. "That looks exactly like the entry above it. Are you absolutely sure you didn't write that yourself?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. That was the moment I realized I wasn't saved. I was just in a different kind of trap. The next few weeks were a blur of polite disbelief. There was no Leo. No fingerprints in the cab that didn't belong to me. No sign of a struggle, other than my own bruised body. No witnesses besides me. The story I told was wild, unprovable. A phantom hitchhiker with a collection of dead men's lives. It sounded like something out of a cheap horror novel, not a police report. They had me talk to a department psychologist. I couldn't drive. Martha had to come get me, her face a mask of worry and confusion. My rig was impounded as they processed it, and every day that passed, the official story seemed to be solidifying. Frank Franklin, a veteran trucker with a perfect record, had some kind of psychotic break on a lonely stretch of highway. I felt like I was losing my mind. I knew what I saw. I knew he was real. The cold dread in his eyes, the weight of that backpack, it was more real than the well-meaning, doubtful faces of the investigators. Then came the nail in the coffin. A detective, a guy named Chen, called me. His voice was sympathetic but firm. "Frank, we got the forensics report back on the logbook," he said. I could hear him shuffling papers over the phone. "And?" I asked, my heart pounding. "It's a match, Frank. A perfect one. The ink is the same, the pressure analysis, the letter formations, it's conclusive. The handwriting is yours. There's no question about it." I was silent. The phone felt heavy in my hand. What could I say? The only piece of physical evidence I had now testified against me. It said I wrote it. It said I was the crazy one. Chen cleared his throat. "Look, the DA isn't going to press charges. There's no crime here, except maybe abandoning a vehicle. Given the circumstances, your clean record, they're letting it go. The case is being closed. You can get your truck back on Monday." Closed. That was it. The monster of Highway 50 had won. He'd not only taken my peace of mind, he'd taken my credibility. He'd made me the villain of my own story. I hung up the phone and just sat there in the dark, feeling a kind of despair I'd never known. A week later, just as I was starting to believe I really had gone crazy, the phone rang again. It was Detective Chen, but his voice was different this time. The professional sympathy was gone, replaced by something I couldn't place. Something tight and strange. "Frank, it's Chen. Listen, something came up. A loose end. Do you remember the dash cam in your rig? It only records video," I said dully. "The cops already looked at it, saw nothing but road and rain." "Right," Chen said, "but it also records audio. Low quality, but it's there. Standard procedure. We sent it to the state audio lab for enhancement, just to be thorough. We thought maybe we'd hear a second voice, something to back you up." We didn't. My heart sank. So that's it, then. No, Frank, that's not it, he said, and his voice dropped lower. They didn't find a second voice. They found something else. The analyst, a real specialist, she was filtering out the engine noise, the rain, all the background static. And buried deep in the mix, she caught it. He paused. I held my breath. It was there the whole time. From the moment you said he got in the truck to the moment the recording cuts out when you bailed. It's very faint, a repeating, cyclical sound. A pattern of soft clicks and short bursts of static. I had no idea what he was talking about. What kind of sound? I heard Chen take a deep breath on the other end of the line. At first, she thought it was just radio interference. But the pattern was too regular. She isolated it, cleaned it up, ran it through a database. He paused again, and when he spoke, his voice was a cold, quiet whisper. It was a police scanner, Frank. Set to sweep local and state patrol frequencies. Your passenger, he wasn't just a psycho. He was listening to us. He knew where every patrol car on that highway was. He knew when we were called. He knew exactly how much time he had to get out of that truck and vanish into the storm after you ran. The world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from my face. It all snapped into place. How he'd mimicked the trucker on the CB. He wasn't just guessing. He was listening to everything. He wasn't just another drifter. He was a predator, a careful, calculating hunter who used the very tools of the law to evade it. I had escaped, but it wasn't because I was smart or fast. It was because I was unpredictable. I had done the one thing his carefully laid plans hadn't accounted for. I'd panicked. I'd thrown myself from a moving truck into a storm. The case is still closed. Officially, it never happened. But I know better. He's still out there, driving the lonely roads, holding his worn backpack, that dead smile on his face. And somewhere, in the quiet darkness of another man's cab, a faint, cyclical sound is buried beneath the rumble of the engine. He's listening, and he's waiting.